Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I am your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. This week's guest is Charles Patti of MySelf Wellness Ketamine Clinic and Podcast out of Florida. We had a great conversation the other month. It really spans quite a bit of content. We talk about his unexpected healing experiences with DMT, the formation of the MySelf Wellness Ketamine Clinic and the kind of results that they're getting there, his involvement with the DMT Extended State Project, or also known as DMTX, his founding of the Warriors of Consciousness nonprofit to help veterans gain access to psychedelic therapy, and also what it's like being a parent when you work in psychedelic medicine. So I've got a lot of great topics to share with you today in my conversation with Charles, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But of course, let's hit some announcements first. To remind you, I am speaking in Los Angeles coming up next weekend at the Psychedelic Awakening event. You can find it online at www.psychedelic-awakening.com. It is a Saturday and Sunday event happening in my old neighborhood near Occidental College, where I got my philosophy degree back in 1994, which I am looking forward to getting a chance to visit. But it's Saturday and Sunday, October 5th and 6th, and I'm speaking Sunday, October 6th at 12 p.m., and I'm sharing a panel with one other individual. We're going to be talking about 5-MeO DMT. Also, I was just contacted the other day by another event organizer who is putting on an event in New Jersey just a couple weeks after this one in Los Angeles, who found me on the lineup for the Los Angeles event and said, hey, would you like to come to New Jersey and give a talk? So we're kind of in conversation about that right now. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's an interesting possibility. And it brings me to my next point, that traveling for talks like these, of course, is expensive. Got to pay plane tickets and take care of lodging and travel and food and all the rest of that. So I just wanted to make a plug that if you've ever thought of making a donation to this podcast but haven't gotten around to it, now would be a great time. I actually could use a little help with some travel funds to get to these events. As I'm sure you, my listening audience, know that I do not often get invited to speak in public. And so this is kind of a rare opportunity to be involved in these two different events, and it's expensive to get there. So if you thought of making a donation, it'd be a great time. You can stop by at my personal webpage at martinball.net and use the PayPal link at the top right of the page. Or you could use this as an opportunity to join up as a supporter over at Patreon, patreon.com/martinwball. And a reminder that if you join at the $20 a month and up level, that gets you access to the back catalog of the Entheogenic Evolution Archive, which I am now adding to every other week as I upload a new interview. An old interview has to be removed from the podcast due to storage limitations, and it moves over there and is accessible to my patrons who support at $20 a month and up. Of course, there is no obligation. You can change at any time. Like, you can pay $20 for 1 month and go and listen to the 100+ hours of back interviews and talks that are available there. And then if you don't feel like supporting anymore, well, you can stop. But of course, I hope you stick around. And the further up the tiers you go, the more access and benefits you get, up to $100 a month at the God Molecule level, which also gets you a complimentary 1-hour video call check-in with me once a month. And of course, I am always available for 30, 60, and 90-minute calls to help you discuss your preparation for your entheogenic experience, your integration. I also work with a number of people who facilitate medicine experiences and provide some mentorship and reflection. Sometimes people bring sort of their challenging cases to me or want to review aspects of their practice. I'm always more than happy to offer that reflection and mentorship and set up a call with you. And it's always interesting because every week I get to talk to just a really diverse group of people around the world. You can stop by at nondualentheogenicintegration.com if you want any more details about any of my services there. Okay, those are my plugs. Those are my pitches. We'll see if a few donations come in to help me travel to these speaking events. And who knows, maybe I'll see you in Los Angeles. And I haven't yet decided if I'm going to do this New Jersey thing or not, but maybe I'll see you in New Jersey. I've actually never given a talk or a presentation on the East Coast of the United States. So that would be like brand new for me. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Charles Patti from MySelf Wellness Ketamine Clinic and Podcast. You can find his podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and relevant links for the Warriors of Consciousness and the DMT-X program will be available in the notes to today's podcast. And I'll be back next week with 2 more chapters from the Solendarian game. And maybe I'll see you in Los Angeles next weekend on Sunday, October 6th at 12 p.m. at psychedelic-awakening.com if you want more information. Okay, here's my interview with Charles. All right, well, I'm welcoming on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Charles Patti, or is it Patti? Patti? I'm probably mispronouncing it. Patti?
No, it's Patti, yeah.
Okay, great. And joining me from Florida, is that where you're currently located?
Yeah, we're in Bonita Springs, Florida.
Bonita Springs, Florida. Where is Bonita Springs, Florida? I'm a little bit familiar with Florida as my wife's family lives in Tallahassee, but most of it not.
Okay, so yeah, we're in Southwest Florida, right in between Naples and Fort Myers.
Okay. So how was your hurricane?
If you mean the one that just happened or whatever, it wasn't really. It was just a bunch of rain, like where we're at anyways.
Okay.
So.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Charles is one of the founders of MySelf Wellness in, what was the name? La Bonita?
In Bonita Springs, Florida, yeah.
Sorry, Bonita Springs, Florida. My apologies. And this is a ketamine clinic. And one of the reasons that we're having Charles here on the podcast is that MySelf Wellness Ketamine Clinic has also launched a new podcast about alternative healthcare, psychedelic therapy, things like that. And we're here to talk all about it today. So, Charles, welcome to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, let's start with where I always like to start with new guests. You know, I often do have repeat guests on the show, but this is the first time you've been on the podcast. And so I always like to start with the fact that everybody who works in psychedelic medicine, they've got some story, some background about how they got into it. So I just want to start there, let you introduce yourself to my listening audience and share whatever you might like of your own personal story of how you got into this modality of healing and therapy with others.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I am Charles Patti, and I am one of the co-founders of MySelf Wellness Ketamine Therapy Center in Bonita Springs, Florida, like Martin had been saying. And psychedelics are near and dear to me because they help save my life. And that's really why I got into this. You know, for like many other people out there suffering from depression and anxiety and from a traumatic loss of my father when I was very young, I started having the symptoms of all of these things and found myself self-medicating with drugs and alcohol at a very young age. And it was through the use of psychedelic medicines therapeutically, I alleviated all of that out of my life. So, 20 years of trials and tribulations and countless rehab stays, and nothing ever seemed to work for me, even though I wanted to put long-term sobriety under my belt. But, it was through some macro doses of psilocybin mushroom and smoking DMT, and then, and LSD 25 and pretty much all of the compounds out there. And then, ketamine being the last one, which was basically the icing on the cake for my psychedelic journey. And, I quit a 6-year opiate addiction from a DMT experience. So if it wasn't for psychedelic medicines, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you right now. And about 5.5 years ago, one of the last times I used compounds, I smoked DMT, and I got this download that I was supposed to quit my jobs and take a leap of faith and start this company with Christina, my other half, because, it was my purpose to be of service and help other people heal. And, it was roughly about 5 years ago. And so, Christina had just had our son, Charlie. I was working in PR and in the electronics industry, and I was working for selling ad space as well. I went upstairs and I said, so listen, I'm supposed to quit my jobs and we're supposed to take a leap of faith and start this company because, I was just told that basically. And I'm supposed to help people heal. And it was very scary for her, and she was reluctant at first, but I was very passionate about it. And I really looked at it like a burning bush experience where I received this like divine guidance that I was supposed to do so. And so I quit my jobs. We took a leap of faith and we opened up our clinic about a week before the lockdown of COVID.
Okay. And then how did that go?
One of the hardest times in the history of mankind, probably, to start a company. We did our first treatment like a week before. And I was like, listen, I know what I was told, and like this is what I'm supposed to do. And so utilizing the laws of attraction and staying positive and helping people first. Fast forward to where we're at now. We've done about 12,000 treatments from our facility and have an astronomically high success rate of getting people off of, typical psych medications like antidepressants, benzodiazepines, antipsychotic medications. We just got a gentleman off fentanyl addiction about 3 weeks ago. He came in, he was actively addicted to fentanyl when he started his treatments, and now he is no longer, and he's completely clean, and he's doing Reiki healing. And so, it's really, we're very mission driven. It's our purpose. It's our purpose to be of service and help other people heal, and it's a really beautiful thing that we've done here.
Yeah. So, not trying to minimize your story in any way, shape, or form, but just what I want to do is kind of reflect on how there's a lot of elements in your story that I personally, I've been doing this podcast for like 17 years now, and this is the kind of story that I hear more and more often these days, of people who are working with psychedelic medicines who came to them out of a desire to heal or transform from either some kind of trauma or some kind of addiction, versus back when I started this podcast in early 2008, it was more of, the psychonauts, the spiritual seekers, so definitely the demographic has shifted, and there's a lot of people now who are looking to either start a podcast or open up a clinic or get involved in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things that I like to ask about is so you approached it through personal healing, but I'm curious, did you have any hang-ups that you needed to overcome in order to kind of allow yourself to explore psychedelic medicine? Or was it, I guess I would just leave it at that. What is it that really brought you to choosing to work with the psychedelic medicines for yourself?
To be completely honest, that it wasn't exactly the route for me.
Okay.
I used to just take copious amounts of lots of different substances. And I started taking psychedelics at a very young age. I think my first LSD trip was like old. And, I didn't go into the night that really triggered this change in my life with the expectation of healing by any means. I was partying that night, and I was still hooked on a lot of different things. And I had taken it's very similar to ketamine, but there's a dissociative called MXC. Okay. And it's basically like ketamine on steroids. And instead of a 1 hour disassociation, it's basically a 4 hour disassociation. And I had taken 500 milligrams of MDMA, which is a lot. I would never suggest anybody take anything like that, but I had an incredibly high tolerance at that time. And about a half hour after I took it, right before the medicine started to kick in, my buddy had MXC and he handed it to me. And I was like, what is this, ketamine? And he's like, well, it's kind of like ketamine, but it's different. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And so I did it. And then it was like the perfect storm. This like eruption happened, and I stood up in the middle of the living room where I was with, some of my friends, and my ex-wife was there. And I said, listen, I go, if I didn't know what the universe was about before, I know what it's about now, man. And I was like, we're all made of energy. Everything's made of energy. And I said, and I'm so full of positive energy right now. And I sat back down in the chair and I looked around, and everything broke down to a quantum state. I could literally see all the atoms humming and vibrating and everything. And I sat down in the chair and I looked above me, and this geometric portal was opening above me on the ceiling. I felt like I was being loaded down in a slingshot, and then I got skyrocketed out of my body into deep space. And I was like looking around, and I was like, I'm dead. I must have died. And I could see like all these stars and galaxies and everything. And then I looked down and I can see that I'm a being made of light. And I turned around, and I wasn't just out in the cosmos. I was actually like on a ship. And I know this will sound crazy for a lot of people, but just bear with me here. And there was beings on this ship, and they were amphibious beings, and they were telepathically communicating with me, telling me to calm down and everything was going to be okay. And then they basically, I got the message that night that I was supposed to stop taking drugs and stop drinking and get my life together because I was supposed to help people heal. And, and then it even got crazier where there was these doors on the ship that opened, and it was like this mist of like smoke, like dry ice was going off. And Jesus walked out. And listen, I'm not a religious person. I'm not going to sit here and try to act like I'm preaching to anybody, because I'm really not. It was just my experience. But I went over and I put my hand on Jesus's arm, and it went whoosh. And it was like this explosion of the most loving, euphoric feeling I had ever felt in my entire life. And like, I knew that everything was going to be okay after that. I had a crippling fear of death until that night, because my dad died when I was a kid. And that was like really like, it was like this burning bush experience for me. And I did not get my life together after that night by any means. I didn't. But it also was like this trigger that showed me about these experiences that were much more than anything that I had ever experienced up to that night. And it gave me hope. And so after that night, I started researching, ET experiences, ketamine, I was like trying to figure out what happened to me. And DMT kept popping up, and the spirit molecule kept popping up with Rick Strassman. And so I spent like the next 6 months of my life, like trying, because I didn't know what integration was back then. I didn't have anybody to talk to about this kind of stuff. Everybody thought I was nuts. Like they said, oh, he sounds crazy. Like, this is crazy. And so I just started watching the spirit molecule on repeat, basically, and integrated myself and like researched DMT over and over and over again. And then about 6 months later, it appeared in my life. And so I used DMT multiple times, had very similar but different experiences to that night with entity contact and receiving the same kind of messages like, hey, man, you're supposed to get your life together. You're supposed to stop doing what you're doing because you're going to help people heal. And, it was like over 10-year period of me like relapsing and getting back on the wagon again. And there was, a few, like probably 6 or 7 years back, I was still drinking and I was still taking Coke. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? And so I heard Terrence McKenna talk about, the 5 gram trip, like take 5 grams, pitch black silent. And so me being the overachiever that I was like, well, I'm going to take 6 grams. And I did that on my bed, and I started to leave my body and went out into the middle of the universe, where I became one with everyone and everything. And then I became one with God and realized that we're all a part of this collective consciousness, that separation was an illusion, and that we're all lit. And so after I came back down into my body that night, I realized that every time that I was taking drugs and alcohol, I was literally poisoning a piece of God. And there was a lot of apologizing to myself and like the universe, God, the collective that night. And then after that, I was like, well, I really need to start treating myself like the extension of the divine that I truly am. And so I started going to the gym. I started meditating. I started saunaing all the time and doing breath work and like really implementing all of these healthy lifestyle practices that I encourage other people now these days to take part in. And so it's like, it's been one heck of a journey, but here we are. And then listen, through the synchronicity of the universe, I'm on the board of directors of Nunotics now, who's working with Dr. Andrew Gallimore and a bunch of other amazing people with extended state DMT. And so it's like, now you got to ask yourself, and one of the things that we're getting ready to study is we're going to continue the studies that Imperial College of London did with, extended state DMT and making contact with entities and bringing back information and things like that. So it's like, were these all just crazy trips or was it actually something that was very real? And I actually believe that these experiences are very real.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing all of that. I'd love to comment on just a few things there. One is going back to the MXE. I was able to get a hold of that once, and I really enjoyed that one, especially mixing it with MDMA. Like, especially the beginning of your description there. It's like, yeah, I remember that. I've been through that with MDMA, and yeah, I would love to emphasize where, you had this experience and then you're kind of like, wow, like what was that and what's going on? And I love that you kind of arrived through that 6 gram mushroom experience that oh, we actually all are one with God, that we are expressions of this one being, because that is definitely my approach to all of this stuff. I do integration work with clients, and I always refer to it as providing integration from a non-dual and energetic perspective of looking at how we are all this one universal being interacting with itself. And so I have a particular take on how to, quote unquote, like interpret these kinds of experiences of what's going on, that if it's all the self interacting with itself, then what does that mean about the person having the experience and having these different encounters? And it sounds like you went through quite the ringer in your own healing process with various ups and downs, and it's good to see you on this end of it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. Listen, like one last story of like, a DMT experience, which kind of correlates with what you were just saying, is that, like I basically, the entire universe folded over on top of itself until I was in the abyss of nothingness. And then when I was sitting there and I was like, I was it, I was everything, I was the one, and I was in the abyss of nothingness, I was like, this is scary, and this is pretty lonely, and there's nobody to talk to. Yeah. And it's kind of depressing. And then boom, I flew back into the living room, and I was like, we break ourselves down into the droplets of water in the ocean of consciousness and put ourselves to sleep to forget who we truly are so we can experience the experience of life. And so it's like, I am the I am, and so are you. And well, knowing that information and having that knowledge, well, what are you going to do with it? Well, I am manifesting a healing organism that's going to help transform humanity to a higher state of consciousness. And that's what I've been working on ever since,
Yeah, well, that's kind of a powerful reminder that if we are the one, which I would agree, we are the one. Sometimes people are looking for, and there's a little bit of element in this in your story, but kind of looking for, well, what's the direction? What am I supposed to do? And what I always like to advise people is it does come down to, well, what do you want to do? That, if you're looking for God to tell you what to do, that's really, you're just talking to yourself ultimately at the deepest level. So it does come down to, where do you want to devote your attention? Where do you want to devote your energy? Where do you want to devote your focus? And then make that your passion and pour yourself into it. But, it's kind of like that experience of connecting with Jesus, where it's just flooding open that sense of unconditional love, that is what we are. And so it's, where do we package that? Where do we direct that? And if it's in service of others, great. If it's in service of ourselves, that's great too, because, we are the one that's doing it. And so there's also a huge burden of personal responsibility there. And also would just like to comment on that perception. So I would refer to that as the non-dual state, when there's that complete sense of oneness. There is no other this, there's nothing else there, that there is an element of loneliness within that. And that when people ask, like, well, why is reality the way that it is? It's like, well, it's actually an answer to that loneliness. So that, yes, we are the same being. We are the same universal consciousness. But here, I'm over on the West Coast of the United States. You're over on the East Coast. We can have a conversation. We can share our experiences. We can share our stories. And that is the connection of the one making connection with otherness within itself. And that's the whole point. Yeah.
No, for sure. Listen, I look at it like we're supposed to try. I mean, not we're supposed to, because everything is perfect. So what you choose to do. But, I feel like I went through a very dual state in my life, and now I do my best to, live in a non-dual state. And it's like, I have this level of stoicism where it's like, I'm in complete understanding that, well, first of all, Charles is just a concept. So let's take the personalization out of it. But I went through everything I went through in order to get to where I'm at. So now I can, it all served its purpose. When I tell my story, by no means am I like, oh, I had this horrible life and I was addicted to drugs and stuff like that or whatever. That was literally the synchronistic flow of the evolution of what I had to go through in order to get to this non-dual state. And now I get to go back in the dark and help pull other people out. It's like, so it's like, everything was perfect, and it always had been. Even back then, I was always perfect, and I always have been. It was just a part of the movie. And it's like, instead of me thinking I'm doing it all, I'm really just observing it and watching it play out. And going back to what your original question was like, a lot of people get into this, to the healing, and some people are on their spiritual journey. I didn't realize I was doing any of it, or I wasn't doing anything. It was all just happening. But the fact is like, one night of partying turned into this massive, enlightening, awakening experience I ended up healing from the medicines, but it's taken me on this spiritual path that's just incredible.
Yeah. And that also is a common sort of theme that I hear from people about sort of the accidental spilling into enlightenment, or the accidental traversing into the realization of unitary consciousness, where people, they're not necessarily looking for it, right? This is one of the side effects of taking psychedelics, in a sense, that if you take enough, not that I want to encourage people to overdo it, but if you take enough and in the right set and setting, and when you're ready to receive that, it can just happen, whether you're intentionally looking for it or not. And even oddly, sometimes with people who are looking for it, they don't find it because there's too much control involved. Like, I want to achieve this outcome. And so that's part of the serendipity of what can happen when we just let go within the psychedelic experience, that we receive what's actually needed or what's most useful, rather than what the character has this idea of, well, this is what I want to get to, this is what I want to achieve, versus just letting it open and see what arises.
No, for sure. Surrendering to the experience. And it's very true though. I actually, time, because especially with ketamine, it's kind of funny, a lot of people, we always encourage our clients to set intentions, and I know that people should set intentions going into an experience, but I noticed that the medicine's going to give you what you need, not necessarily what you want. when you take it at the right doses and surrender to the experience. And so it's I always wanted to know the answers, the secrets of the universe. Where do we come from? Who we are? What our purpose is? Is there a God? All of these questions I had when I was younger, and that was what the answers I ended up getting. But I didn't go into it with those intentions when I received the answers. It's kind of I went into it with this whole understanding of all right, I'm going to completely surrender to this. Not that first night. That first night, I did not know what I was getting into.
Yeah.
After that, though, I was I am completely surrendering to this experience, and I'm just going to let you take me where I need to go and show me what I need to see. And the thing is that first night kind of probably was like that in a way, though, because MXC is a dissociative like ketamine. And so it's dissociative force you into surrendering to the experience at the right doses. There's no real holding on or trying to control anything. And listen, I actually think that that's why ketamine is such a valuable tool. I mean, I think it's a valuable tool for many reasons, but people ask me, well, so listen, if I was going to do psychedelics, what would be your first suggestion? What compound do you think I should use? And I'm not going to say ketamine because I have a clinic. I'm a fan of all of the compounds, but the fact is that I think ketamine is a great entry level for people, even though it can cause some of the most profound psychedelic experiences a human being can have, because it allows you to, it almost forces you into a surrendered state on the medicine because of the anesthetic qualities of it. That's when people really, from my experience, what I observe and see is when people have the most profound healing experiences is when they can just let go, and ketamine kind of forces you into that.
Yeah. And just something I wanted to refer back to that you mentioned was that perception, as you're going through this transformation, that perception and appreciation that everything in your life had been perfect, even though there had been struggles, there had been trauma, there had been drug addiction. And this is one of these kind of interesting paradoxes of this level of realization that everything's perfect, but it doesn't mean that things can't also be better. And even though my life before was perfect and it was undesirable in that time period, it brought me to where I am now. And it's almost like an invitation to create more perfection from a more conscious standpoint of life can be better. It can be better for me. It can be better for other people. And yeah, it's all perfect, but we can also move towards our own greater perfection and our own greater harmony. So I love that that's an element of your story there. So getting back more into ketamine, and this power to surrender within ketamine, and that as being really part of the deeply transformative nature of the healing process. I'm curious, in terms of working with clients, running a clinic, because you've touched on this already, that generally when people are coming for healing, they do say, here's my intention. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I want to treat. How do you prepare people for the idea of letting go, and also maybe gently holding that balance of, well, this is my intention, but this is my openness to whatever I receive. Is that part of the process of preparing people for their initial ketamine experiences?
Yeah, so like we do a medical history with our nursing staff first, and like everybody that works at our facility has done the medicine. Okay, and everybody else is also well versed in other psychedelic compounds. Dr. Ferber, who's our head psychiatrist and medical director, his first LSD experience was in 1957 in a clinical study. He was friends with like Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. He lived with Osho for like 20 years. And so the thing is that when Dr. Ferber meets with people for their actual diagnosis and approval for the treatments, it's not like your typical psych evaluation. Like he's been a meditator for over 50 years and teaches meditation. And he's basically like explains to people like, watch the movie of the mind. Watch it play out. We really do a lot of preparation and explaining to people like, that this is a tool for meditation. Like ketamine is a chemically induced meditative state at the deepest level possible. When they actually did studying of the brain, meditators are in an alpha, like their brain is in alpha state. And that's what happens when you're on ketamine too. So, I joke with our clients and say, you can achieve what a Buddhist monk that's been meditating for 50 years can achieve in an hour at our facility. Not taking anything away from the 50 years of meditating, but it sends you into that deep meditative state. And then it's important to just stay in your breath, watch the movie of the mind, watch this movie play out. And when people do that and you don't get too involved in the actual session, but you just watch this movie play out, honestly, listen, like I would consider myself a psychonaut. I had hundreds and hundreds of psychedelic deep dive experiences. And since I did my ketamine treatments when we opened up about 5 years ago, I haven't done psychedelics since. And it was really like from my symptoms of PTSD and anxiety and things like that, ketamine did for me what none of the other compounds actually had accomplished. And so it was, the experiences that I had were very reminiscent of those DMT experiences and those burning bush experiences that I had previously on other psychedelic compounds. But the way that I felt after I did my 6 treatment protocol when we opened up, it was the absolute game changer for me.
And do you think it was because of that more calming, quiescent, meditative state that's generated through ketamine that just allowed that to land in a different way, or that brought you more into a sense of stability afterwards?
So I know this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but like, what else have I talked about that doesn't sound crazy? Is that I actually could feel the ketamine healing my brain. Like I'm not sitting here making a statement that we're healing people's brains. I'm not a medical professional, nor am I making that claim. But from my understanding and experience of when I went through my treatments, it was like electricity was firing through my neural pathways. My brain was literally going, and I could feel like neurological healing happening. And I had been through some seriously intense traumatic experiences through my journey where I've seen and seen a lot of crazy things that have happened and, been attacked times and stuff like that. And it's like, I had been through a lot of trauma, and I was taking hundreds of milligrams of edible THC every day to kind of like navigate through my days before I did ketamine, because my PTSD was so severe and I didn't really realize how bad it was. And then after I did the ketamine treatments, I couldn't even use it anymore. It was so weird. It was like I went from doing that, like taking 200 milligrams of RSO at a time, like to start my day basically, to the point where like I would take 10 milligrams of THC and I would be like incapacitated. And it was like I was so stoned from taking it that I wasn't even like productive anymore. And so I ended up taking that out of the equation because I was using the THC to self-medicate these underlying issues like of the PTSD and everything. And it was for the first time in my life, like I felt so good without having to take anything anymore that I was just like, I'm good now. I don't need to take anything anymore.
Oh, that's awesome. So at MySelf Wellness, I know that there are different routes of administration for ketamine, with like the nasal spray, there's the lozenges, there's IV. What modalities do you guys like to work with at MySelf Wellness?
So we probably do about 99% intramuscular ketamine at our facility. And listen, we're never going to pigeonhole anybody, and we do offer IV ketamine, but like we're big believers in, we believe that the real magic of the medicine happens when you're in a disassociated state. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic, and when you're in a disassociated state, this is when the mind separates from the body and it removes the active blocks that are holding past repressed traumatic experiences or things that might be in our subconscious that we don't even know we need to deal with. And I'm sure you can get there through IV ketamine, and we do have good results when we do IV ketamine, but I think there's something very special about all of the medicine being absorbed so quickly through an intramuscular shot rather than being slow dripped over a 45-minute IV drip. We also specialize in a psychedelic dosing protocol with the medicine. So our protocols are a little bit different than what a lot of people out there are doing. We don't do 0.5 milligrams per kilogram over a 45-minute IV drip. And listen, but that being said though too, Dr. Ferber and our medical team does a lot of hand tailoring at our facility. We have a lot of questions that we ask people that determines the doses that they get or where we're going to start them at, how we titrate the medicine. And, it's because everybody has that experience through their own personal journey from doing the treatments at our facility. So sometimes you'll have a 115-pound woman that needs more medicine than a 250-pound guy. And because of the experience, because of the questions that we ask through the process, we can accompany or get people into those therapeutic states. But we do mostly intramuscular. We offer IV, and we do a little bit of IV. And then every once in a while, for a couple that is, going through some issues, we'll have them approved by Dr. Ferber, and we can order some low-dose nasal spray for a couple and do couples ketamine therapy at a non-dissociative or psychedelic dose of the medicine.
So when using the intramuscular route, how long does that experience last?
Same amount of time as a regular IV ketamine experience would last. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour, 45, 50 minutes. We split people's first dose on them just to make sure that they're comfortable with the medicine. We'll take half of the dose that they were normally going to get, give them that, monitor, and then 15 minutes later, or right around there, we give them the second half of the medicine. And then moving forward from that, we move forward accordingly to people's experiences and a number of questions that we ask people going through their treatments.
So something I'm curious about, and I'll just start with sort of a comparison, is I'm wondering if there's any kind of somatic processing that happens through these experiences with ketamine. So the reason why I ask is because my world is the 5-MeO DMT world, and I also really promote the idea of let's get the character out of the way. Let's get the egoic structure out of the way so that whatever is repressed can process out. And one of the things that's really unique when working with 5-MeO DMT is that we get a lot of somatic processing that tends to happen. In other words, energies in the body take over, and people express and embody things that there's no conscious agent that's doing that. So it can be a very physical event that takes place with 5-MeO, which is a rather kind of unique presentation of a psychedelic experience. My impression is that ketamine does not do that, because it's kind of more of this down and out sort of energetic process, not necessarily this explosive nature, say, of 5-MeO DMT. But I'm curious, are there somatic elements that show up, or are people usually feeling that these releases of repressed materials, that they're working themselves out in perhaps a different way through this modality?
We do a lot of friends that do medicine work, and they're shamans or serve medicine, and we actually treat a lot of people that serve 5-MeO DMT because I'm trusted and they trust us, and they know that they're coming to a good place. And I've actually had a lot of people that have tons of experience with 5-MeO come here and do an intramuscular shot of ketamine and say that was as profound, if not more profound, than my 5-MeO experience has been. The actual physical channeling or some the things that you're talking about, because of ketamine, it is more of a tranquil, or it could be looked at as a tranquilizer in a way. There's not so much movement where people are flopping around or doing all of the motions. That being said, though, people will start doing energy work with their hands and maybe doing mudras and things like that. So like there is a lot of that actually happens. Sometimes, when people that work with medicine a lot, like the people I was just describing, they might actually verbally channel things or say things that, like might seem a little bit odd to other people.
Yeah.
But like, listen, like when used properly in the right facility with a high vibrational group of people, because medicine does take on the vibration of the person that's serving the medicine, some very, very amazing and beautiful things happen at our facility.
Yeah. Well, I'm always interested in these more somatic expressions, and also even the spontaneous saying of words or sentences or quote unquote messages that happen, and even alterations in voices that happen. And I think that more and more the psychedelic community is getting interested in sort of this side of the transformative and healing process. But I think that it's also been really sort of underplayed in a sense, because even with the word psychedelic, it's mind manifesting versus I'm really curious about how is it processed in the body? How is the body participating in the release of repressed materials? How is it participating in the transformation and the expression from the inner state to the outer state? So it's nice to hear that you're observing some of these things in the process that your clients are going through. And I just hope it gets to be something that's talked about even more, and that I think sometimes the mind is overrated, right? With psychedelics, it's all about the mind and thinking new thoughts. I'm like, yeah, but actually we're housed in the body as well. So I think it's just an important avenue of understanding the transformation and healing process.
Listen, like guys, some people will understand what I'm about to say, and some people might think it sounds very woo-woo. But the truth is like, we're vibrational beings, and I believe that our our body takes on the vibration of the medicine that we're taking on, right? So, I believe that ketamine and DMT are two incredibly high vibrational crystals, and so like when people are doing these kind of sessions, they are raising their vibration and sometimes shedding off lower vibrational things that no longer serve them anymore. And like this goes to the real spiritual aspect of the medicine. Like, listen, like MySelf Wellness is where East meets West. It's where science meets spirituality. And we do realize the actual very profound spiritual aspects of this medicine. We're not just administering a dissociative anesthetic to people that when they come to our clinic, like, they're coming to a place where we are holding space for them and they are going on a journey. And this can be an incredibly spiritual journey where people speak with deceased relatives or process past traumatic experiences. Sometimes people say they sit with angels during their treatments, or people have Jesus experiences at our facility. Other times people say they make contact with these, higher dimensional beings or these entities where they might receive downloads or information that's going to, help them in life. All of these things are, in my personal opinion, very, very real. And like, listen, like, that's what I tell people is that, one thing that I did in my journey when it comes to psychedelics is that like I followed the messages. Like I looked at it as a blueprint for my life. Sometimes people might have had those kind of experiences that I had and received this information and been like, wow, what a crazy trip. And I'm like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Like that was a message that I'm taking seriously. I'm going to use it as a blueprint for my life. And I did. And it all ended up working out better than I thought I could imagine. And so like, I think a lot of this stuff is very real.
Yeah. So following that inspiration to create the clinic, opened up just before COVID. How have things been going since the recovery from COVID? And it sounds like you've served a lot of people at this point.
Yeah, no, so everything's going fantastic. I mean, listen, like, our company's grown year over year. We have an astronomically high success rate at our facility. Like we're seeing amazing efficacy with autism and substance abuse issues. And like, listen, people that have been struggling for like decades that have nothing has ever worked for them. And then they come in and do 6 treatments at our facility. And in 3 weeks, they have a completely different life. It's like, listen, like I tell people, and this goes to the psychedelic, properties or capabilities of ketamine is that, like we have one of the most profound psychedelics on the planet available now legally to people. Like people are very, interested in MDMA and psilocybin, which I am too. But like a lot of people don't really really think that ketamine has those kind of properties or capabilities to them. And it's like, when done properly, like, we basically made our protocols to mirror an hour-long DMT experience. And, and the thing is too, is like, one of the founders of Neurotics, my buddy Egan, I had a conversation with him one day, and I'm like, listen, man, because we were talking to Dennis McKenna one day, and Dennis was saying how like ketamine and DMT are very, very similar when you look at like the molecular structure of the compounds, right? And I was telling, and Rick Strassman talks about how, like, these two molecules are only like two of the only molecules really that cause people to have NDE or near-death experiences, right? And so, I was talking to Egan, and I'm like, listen, man, I'm like, do you think possibly because people experience these death experiences on ketamine, like, it's like, not like anybody really literally physically dies at our facility. Yeah. Nobody's ever got hurt. That being said, it's a very common theme for people to have these rebirth experiences. Like, they'll feel like they die a physical death and they go out into this spiritual realm and then they come back into their body, right? And it's like a rebirth scenario. And I told Egan one day, I'm like, do you think that when people take the right dose of ketamine and they have these death experiences, that it might somehow trigger a release of endogenous DMT in their brain, and they're actually not only having a ketamine trip, but possibly having a DMT trip at the same time too? And listen, we don't have any data or studies to prove any of this, but it sounds like it could be incredibly valid to both of us.
Yeah, and I would just add, it's also possible, since the body produces 5-MeO-DMT as well, that could be involved with it as well, because that also is quite notorious for producing ego death and near-death experiences. I would say more reliably so than DMT.
No, for sure. I know. No, definitely. Yeah, no, I most of my NN DMT experiences was really like these contact experiences, entities, higher dimensional beings, angels, whatever labels you want to put on it. And like, and it's funny, I like the studies that they did at Imperial with extended state DMT, Graham Hancock, who's also on the advisory board for Neurotics, he said basically that, like, people that had never met or had conversations were going into these realms and making contact with the same beings, retrieving the same information, and coming back and telling the same stories. And, so it's like, I don't know. It's like, is there a nearby dimension that this is tapping people into, where, we're retrieving this information by these beings that might actually really want to, like, help humanity. And this goes back to 50,000 years ago, the cave art that we're seeing on the walls, where people were making these kind of contact experiences and bringing back information from the ethers. I mean, I don't know. Sounds pretty cool to me.
So, working in this healing space with these sorts of phenomenon happening, I mean, I know you've said a couple of times, like, I know this may sound crazy to people, but of course, working in the psychedelic space, like, well, yeah, this stuff is kind of normal for people to talk about. But it is kind of interesting in the modern American healthcare therapeutic landscape, where these kinds of experiences, these near-death experiences of entities, beings merging with God, this, what I used to say to people was like, it's just another day in the office, right? This is just another day in the office. Yeah, this kind of stuff happens. I'm just curious about, what's your take on, like, working in this really sort of kind of out there realm where people are really getting positive results and really feeling that their lives are transforming. I mean, just at this point in your life, like, what do you think of that?
I couldn't be happier, man. Honestly, like, I guess we're all living the dream, right? Because this is the dream of life. But, like, listen, like, this is beautiful. I mean, like, this is magic, right? This is magical. I mean, like, we're having conversations about otherworldly entities that are helping humanity or giving us guidance. We're dealing with medicines, like, listen, on the scientific level, that are doing tons of neurological healing to the brain. I mean, like, no other pharmaceutical medications out there are doing that. Like psilocybin, DMT, ketamine, literally remapping and restructuring neural pathways in the growth, increasing natural dopamine levels. So, like, on a scientific level, all of this stuff should be looked at as completely groundbreaking, even though it's nothing new. Everybody's like, it's like we're reinventing the wheel over and over again now. There's all of these new studies coming out and proving the same kind of things that we've already, for the people that have really been immersed in this, like we've known this stuff's been happening for a long time. And like now it's like getting the information out to the masses and getting more global acceptance about this stuff. But like, listen, like this is the most exciting field that I could ever possibly imagine being in. And like, once you have an awakening or an enlightening experience off a macro dose of whatever psychedelic compound that your choice or you're talking about is, and seeing out of the veil, outside the veil, basically, there's no going back. Like I could never imagine doing anything else than what I'm doing right now. And it's like, listen, not only did it help save my life, and not only do I get to see miracles basically happen on a daily basis at our clinic, but like all of the other stuff that we're talking about and getting ready to do these other studies with, like, who knows what's going to end up happening because of this? Like, are psychedelics going to raise the collective vibration and have some sort of like disclosure that comes with it? Or like, are we going to raise the collective vibration of the planet and like, transform humanity to a higher state of consciousness, moving from like 3D to 5D consciousness? Or like, listen, like there's a lot of things that are talked about out there that sound very crazy, but like a lot of this conversation has been very crazy to a lot of people that wouldn't understand this up to this point. But like for me, I can talk about mental health and neuroplasticity and getting people off their pharma meds or helping people find mental wellness. But the truth is that to me, this is about the transformation of the transformation of humanity to a higher state of consciousness.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good segue to talk about the next segment that we want to discuss here in the podcast. And this is the new development of your podcast, which is named after the clinic, the MySelf Wellness. And obviously, you're experienced, you're inspired, you're right there at the front lines with the clinic itself. You're obviously into it. So it's not surprising that you might want to start a podcast, and it seems like you're enthusiastically ready to share, ready to talk about it. But let's talk about the development. Like, where did the idea to put the podcast together? How did that come together, and how did you decide? How do you want to do it?
I'm fully aware that my story isn't going to resonate with everybody. Okay, not everybody's been through similar situations that I've been through. One of the ways that we help break the taboos and stigmas associated with all of this stuff is we give people a platform to share their experiences from. Like, listen, like, and that's also what we do from our nonprofit, and I'll talk about that in a minute here. But listen, like, I just had a Marine national spokesperson for our nonprofit, the Warriors of Consciousness, on our podcast, and now we have beautiful video clips of him talking about how he had a Jesus experience on ketamine at our facility, and that his life was forever changed after that first experience. And this is a decorated Marine who's, he's getting ready to take the seat of the president of the Collier County Veterans Council, and now he's out there on the rooftops, or screaming from the rooftops, telling everybody, "Hey, listen, I was suicidal, and this stuff saved my life." And but like we've got the Marine, and like we have different people from different backgrounds sharing different stories. And listen, it doesn't even have to be psychedelic healing, okay? Like, we're just talking about maybe alternative healing, or like things that people are doing on their daily lives, whether it is like meditating or doing breath work, or eating organic and drinking spring water, or just whatever people are doing. MySelf Wellness, whatever you're doing in your life to take your life to the next level, that's what we want to talk about. Because listen, a lot of what's been going on for a lot of years for people that haven't, that have been kind of like not doing these alternative healthy lifestyle practices, might not have been working for them so well. And so like we want to educate the public and give people like, information about different options out there that might work for them. Listen, even though I say we're getting people off antidepressants and things like that, like by no means am I at war with big pharma. Okay. Like everybody can have their own opinions about things. And like, the thing is like, if you're on antidepressants and they work for you, I'm a fan of that. Like, I'm not sitting here and telling anybody what you should or shouldn't do in your life, but I do also want to give people information just in case that certain things that they're doing in their life aren't working. And like, hey, listen, this worked for me. And it worked so well that now I'm going to share it with you. And if it sounds like something you might want to try, well, hopefully it's an option for you then.
Yeah. So when did you decide to start the podcast and bringing other people into the conversation and sharing this?
Well, we had another podcast called Psychedelic Radio a while ago, which we had some great people on, like Rick Strassman and stuff like that. The thing is that it was different though, because like the podcast was just more verbal. Okay. And so like you really couldn't see anything, but like when people watch content and you see these talking head videos and stuff like that, like it really brings an emotional state out of people, and they can really see people and connect with them. And so that's what shifted us into a different direction with the MySelf Wellness podcast. And so it's like it's in a studio where there's a bunch of cameras set up and stuff like that. And like, we're making content to get out to the masses and like, and really help break the taboos and stigmas with all of this, behind all of this stuff. And like, listen, like I'm not a scientist. We all know that. Like I'm a guy who healed through psychedelics. But the fact is that data is incredibly important. And I'm a big fan of data, but data doesn't draw up any emotion with people. Okay. It's the stories that draw up emotion with people. And so it's like, look, if the data was 100% the effective part of all of this, then MDMA would have just went through FDA approval, because, if you're telling me that, almost 7 out of 10 people that take MDMA that have the most severe kinds of PTSD out there have the diagnosis taken away from them, well, then that should be a no-brainer that compound should go through FDA approval. And then when you want to talk about, oh, well, there might be liver toxicity associated with it, well, like, hey, there's, 22 plus veterans out there killing themselves every day, and every single one of those guys can go to the corner store and buy a gallon of vodka right now, which will really mess your liver up. And so, like, the thing is that, but see, like, getting those guys that are healed through psychedelics and sharing their stories with like what we're doing on the podcast, that's what's going to strike the emotion in the public to really fight for this stuff and be like, hey, wait a second. Like, the numbers might not have done it up to this point, but if I fill a room full of first responders and veterans and military personnel and like cops and that used to run task force to arrest people for psychedelics, and now he's screaming from the rooftops that ketamine therapy and MySelf Wellness saved his life, so it's like, I feel like that's really what's going to propel this movement forward exponentially faster.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's a good route to take. And I will also just note that sometimes I'm surprised that there's people who are not moved by those kinds of stories. Like it was back in, I think it was 2015. So this is like 9 years ago, I was interviewed by this guy who runs a radio program in Canada. And the host of the show said that he was a former police officer and a vet. And we were talking about the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. And his attitude was, people these days, they're just weak. They just need to toughen up. And like, I don't care if they feel any better taking these things, that they just got to toughen up. And I was kind of blown away by this guy. And then he wouldn't even let me give a rejoinder to that. He just cut off my mic, and that was the end of the show. So, I'm definitely of the same opinion. Like, let's get sympathetic stories out there of people who have been transformed, and also understand that some people are going to still be like, I still think it's just a drug. I still think it's just wrong, and that people gotta toughen up. It's weird, but I do think that it's a great route to go, and especially I like that idea of using video because, my podcast is only audio, but I, of course, always like to see the people that I'm talking to. And for me, that's a very important part of doing integration work with clients, is actually being able to see them, because there's so much communicated through body language, through facial expressions, little micro expressions, and it allows us to connect at a human level. So in terms of putting together the studio, how much of an effort was that to actually create a studio where you're going to be recording like almost like a television show? It's a podcast, but you've got cameras, I guess you've got lights. Do you have producers? Do you have like a whole crew that's part of this?
Yeah. So like it was synchronicity of the universe, man. The right things happen to appear at the right time. And I met a guy who owns an organic stevia company. And I was filming a little bit of content at the time, and I was showing him a little bit of the content to see what he thought of it. And he's like, hey man, I got some guys I want you to meet. And it just so happens that at his organic stevia company, it's like this huge loft, and upstairs at his at his office, these guys are running their podcast out of there. And so like he introduced me to them. They had a beautiful setup, beautiful cameras. And I looked at some of the work that they were doing, and I was just like, oh, this is like another, like the universe presents what you need when you need it kind of thing. And so like we started working with them, just filming content a little bit to start with, and then moving into the podcast. But like, yeah, no, it's an awesome opportunity.
So in terms of production of the podcast, I'm just curious how you like to run that. And I'll just share that for myself. Like what I like to do is I do batches of interviews where, okay, the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get in as many interviews as I can. And then I can keep them in the bank in a sense. And then they come out slowly over the coming months. I believe your podcast is coming out weekly, but how do you like to run the production schedule for that? In other words, are you doing like bolts of interviews, or do you try and do one interview a week, or how is that on your end?
So similar to your podcast, ours isn't like locked into like a 30-minute segment or whatever. And so like we've been filming probably like 1 to 2 a week tops. One day we did 2 back to back, just because like some of the people that we're having on the show are incredibly busy and have busy schedules. And I'm like, just like, I'll do it whenever you can do it kind of thing. Cause they've got a big voice or whatever and stuff. And so like we did 2 back to back one day. That was a lot. But we got it done. But the thing is like, so like we have a bunch in the bank right now that we're releasing on Fridays. So our podcast does come out every single Friday. But like, yeah, no, it's just and then like, because we have so many in the bank, we're filming other content with these guys too. Like I was just at the Forbidden Knowledge Award in Miami last week, hosted by Billy Carson. And so like I had the content crew come out to Miami with me, and we filmed a bunch of stuff out there last week too. So it's not even just podcast. It is podcast, but it's just like content, getting the word out, just anything that we can do to help get this movement really rolling.
Yeah. And in terms of the episodes themselves, you already mentioned that you're not limited to 30 minutes. Do you have like a time frame that you like to fit people in, or do you like to leave it open-ended in terms of how much people want to share and talk?
It's organic. It's like, if we go for an hour, we go for an hour. If we go for an hour and a half, we go for an hour and a half. Usually like, like we talk about all of the points that it flows. Like we're in this flow state, and then all of a sudden we'll come to the end of it, and it's like, well, this was a great show. It's kind of like, listen, like I like the vibe of what we've been doing here, because like we're really like, listen, like you're asking me great questions, but we're just chopping it up. We're having a great conversation. And that's really the kind of flow of what we've been doing with our podcast, is like really just getting in there and having it's me, my other half, Christina, she's one of the co-hosts, and then my buddy Jamie, who's actually like the CEO of our content company. He's such a great podcaster. We're like, listen, man, we want you to be on the show too. So it's us 3 as the hosts, and then we interview somebody, or not really interview, but just have a deep conversation about all the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. So what is that, working with a whole team of interviewers there?
I like it. I think it's great because it's like it's good. Everybody's got different perspectives, and like Christina, I mean, like, listen, like, she's my wife to be, but like, she's got a female perspective. And then, Jamie's got his own life experiences, and Jamie just started going through the treatments at our facility. And like during Jamie's second treatment, he talked about it on the show the other day. His father and his cousin are both passed, and he actually had a full conversation with both of them during his second treatment at our clinic. And so like we got to talk about that, and now that he's done the treatments, and now like it's like ignited this passion for psychedelics in his mind, because he hadn't done psychedelics, but like he had some stuff that he needed to process, so he started going through treatments. And so now it's just like a bunch of people that have, or 3 people that have a ton of experience with psychedelics, that bring on another person that has experience with healing or with psychedelics, and or maybe not, or somebody that's just doing something really healthy that they're passionate about, and we just get them and we just chop it up. And listen, man, like, I want to have you on the show as well too. I think we could all have a great conversation together on top of all of this.
Yeah. You ever get anybody thus far who is not very communicative, or maybe too communicative? So, I've been doing this show for this is my 17th year now, and every once in a while you get a guest and they're like, yes, no. Like, oh, like, how do I draw more conversation out of this person? And then sometimes also you get someone who's really a talker, and maybe they're going on like a 40-minute soliloquy. Had any experiences like that thus far, and how do you handle it if you get a situation like that?
Yeah, but like one of the interviews that we did, like nobody got to say one word. It was just like, but like, hey. But you know what? The truth is that everything that was said during it was actually incredibly valid, and we'll get some great content chopped up out of it. And the guy's got a big voice too, so it's like it was great just sitting back and listening to all of his experience and getting all these clips that we're going to be able to put out to help break this taboos and get the message out there. I kind of look at it like, it always goes the way it's supposed to. We just probably don't realize it when it's going through it. But I don't know. I think also, though, like when you're in that kind of zone where you're just having a conversation with somebody or just chopping it up or whatever, things seem to flow pretty well,
Yeah. Yeah. And so you've mentioned a few times, and I'm kind of sorry that, well, I'm not kind of. I'm sorry that she wasn't able to join us, but you've mentioned Christina. You said this is now your wife-to-be, so you guys are engaged. And you also mentioned her in terms of actually developing the clinic. And I would just invite you to share anything that you might feel inspired to about working with your wife in this space and her being not only your romantic partner in interest, but also your business partner in these ventures. What's that like for both of you?
We work well together. I mean, like you'd think it would be hard, and sometimes, like listen, we're with each other like 24 hours a day, even at work or when we go home and stuff like that. But like the truth is, and like I'll say this, like I give her all the credit. Like without her, none of this would have happened. She had my back, and she took the leap of faith with me, and even when things were really tough and listen, we were the underdogs at one point, neither of us are medical professionals. We had never ran our own business like that before. It was literally off of hey, I just smoked DMT and, hey, and our son was like, a baby, and she was like definitely nervous. But the fact is that she stood by me and she really was like, my rock, and we built something really beautiful together. So I got to give all the credit to her.
Awesome. As a parent to another parent, you just mentioned that you have a young son. What are your thoughts in terms of raising your son around having awareness of psychedelic medicines and the business that you work in? Curious if there's anything you'd be interested to share there.
So Charlie just turned 5 the other day. Yeah. And he is awesome. And like, we're raising him that we want to raise him where like he does I am affirmations and he meditates and he does breath work and he's like this little like lit baby, right? The thing is though, like, so we were at an event recently at this like dinosaur exhibit. It was on Father's Day and there. And so they wanted to interview me and they wanted to interview Charlie. Okay. And so I'm like holding Charlie up and I'm like, we're answering questions, and so we're answering questions. And the reporter looks at Charlie and she's like, she's like, what are you doing here today? And he looks right in the camera and he goes, we're doing ketamine. And I was like, no. And then like, and like we were out at dinner the other night and somebody who's like very prominent in our town, like, he's a politician. He's part of the political party and everything and stuff like that. He comes up to the table and he shakes my hand and we're talking. And luckily he didn't hear Charlie, but like Charlie looked at Christina and he's like, what psychedelics does he do? And like, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. He knows we help people with psychedelics and the medicine and stuff like that. But like, listen, like, I think that I know that psychedelics made me a better parent. I didn't do psychedelics really after my parenthood, but like leading up into it, it made me much more present. It makes me much calmer and not so much of on this emotional roller coaster. I find myself he'll do things that probably would have really annoyed me or like threw me completely off course previously in life, and I just watched it play out and kind of laugh and be like, okay, and so like I actually think that maybe not from like his perspective, I'm so grateful that I had my psychedelic journey the way that I did before having Charlie, because it completely changed the person that I am into being like the best version of myself, or the best parent that I could possibly be for him.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That for a short period of time, I had an associate who started a podcast called Psychedelic Parenting. And it was kind of all built around this question of like, okay, so you're a psychedelic user or a psychedelic proponent and you're a parent. How do you approach this with your kids? How do you raise them with this knowledge, or do you keep it secret from them? And I just think it's so awesome that we're in this very new era. Like, again, I've been doing this for like 17 years when I started. And when people ask like, oh, you've got a podcast, what's it about? And I'd say, well, it's about psychedelics. Everybody would giggle like, oh yeah, I know about psychedelics. And I just love how normalized it's become at this point, where we can talk about it and people don't have weird, uncomfortable giggles, and that there's not this expectation that, oh, you're a parent and so you're going to be hiding that from your kid. It's like, no, I'm raising them with knowledge of this. Like for me, my youngest son is 11, and it was now, like 4 or 5 years ago that the psilocybin assisted services bill was going through the Oregon voting process and election process. And I had a sign out front that said, vote for Measure 109. I think that was the right one. Psilocybin assisted services. And my son's like, well, what's this psilocybin? And, first he couldn't pronounce the word, right? He's trying to read. He's like, what is this? And then I told him about mushrooms, and like, there's these things called magic mushrooms, and said, yeah, and this is kind of the world that I work in. And so he's just been raised with it. And, we have, like, even yesterday we had someone who runs in a theogenic temple was over and we're hanging out in the swimming pool, and we're kind of talking about clients and all of that. And it's normal for him. And I love the fact that it can be normal for him, and he doesn't need to feel like, oh, we need to be like cagey about this. And actually his best friend's dad is one of the licensed psilocybin providers here in Oregon. So I love it that we can normalize it. We can raise our kids with this, and sometimes they might say funny, awkward things in public that we're not planning on.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is, it's like, see, you're looking at it from the right scope, though, where it's like, why shouldn't we educate our children about these medicines? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, like, listen, like, I think that we should be, educating our children about the things that are really helpful in life and that are helping save people's lives and things like that. And so it's like, I'll be completely transparent about, how they helped me heal when the timing is right. And like, I think I've said it because he hears me talk all the time or whatever. But the thing is that, like, I explained to him that we use ketamine because he talks about it. He's like, what's ketamine? Yeah. And I'm just like, and I talk about it all day. It's a medicine that we use at our clinic to help people feel better and heal. We help people with this. And so he knows that ketamine is helping people. I mean, I don't think he can grasp exactly how it's helping people. But that being said, though, he's aware that we have a clinic that helps people with ketamine.
Yeah. And so it's awesome. He's being able to be raised with this, and he'll have a nuanced understanding as he grows up, and he'll see the effects of it. And hopefully he will continue to admire mom and dad and the good work that they're doing and how they're helping other people, and see that just as an extension of compassion and our shared humanity. So cool.
Yeah, man. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned a nonprofit. Let's go ahead and we can hit that as sort of our last topic. What is the nonprofit, and how's that involved with these other levels of what it is that you're doing?
So ketamine is not covered by insurance, and it is FDA approved as an anesthetic. So we're using it off label, and that's why it's not being covered by insurance. And so we are a cash pay facility. The entire treatment package of 6 treatments, 2 psychiatric meetings, integration through the process of the treatments goes for $3,300. Do offer military personnel, veterans, first responders, things like that. But in the oneness of everything, everybody needs access to this. And so, Christina and I started the Warriors of Consciousness, which is our nonprofit. And we really haven't raised much money, like almost none actually, but Christina and I have actually put almost 100 people through treatments for free that couldn't afford them up to this point. And so, it's basically, it's an organization to help sponsor people through ketamine therapy that can't afford it. And it's specifically for ketamine at this time. It would have been for MDMA also if it would have went through FDA approval, but being strategic with it, I sat down and had a hard session about what I should do with this nonprofit to begin with. And I didn't want to include any of the compounds that weren't FDA approved or, legal for people to use. And it's because this movement, which the Warriors of Consciousness is a nonprofit, but it's a movement that we're creating where I want cops and politicians and people to be involved with this organization that might not be able to be involved with it if it wasn't for something that is FDA approved or federally legal. And so we will expand into other compounds when the time comes. But as for right now, it's just for ketamine. So I can get, all of these people that are movers and shakers in the world that have a voice and can make these kind of differences in our country available for people.
Yeah. Well, that's great that you guys are sort of attending to that side of things, because that definitely is one of the drawbacks of the legal and semi-legal psychedelic therapy front, is that it is expensive because, especially if you're putting together a clinic, you got to pay for that. If you have full staff and medical professionals, you got to pay for that. There's no way around it. And not everybody is able to afford it. And so it's nice that you are developing this side to make sure that there is access. And I just want to extend a thank you for what you said, that you have put people through who have not been able to pay. I think that that's also an important part for people just to use as a model, that sometimes our compassion extends beyond what other people's wallets can afford. And if you're able to do that, I think that that's an excellent thing to do. And also understanding that not everybody is able to do that, because people who run clinics, they've got to pay their own bills. You got to pay your mortgage. You got to support your family. And we live in a capitalist monetary economy, so it's just part of it. But I think whatever people can do to make it more affordable and to increase access it's the noble way to go. And so more of that.
Well, it's a lot of people be ketamine, it's expensive and you guys are just out after all the money. And it's I have 3 nurses in my building right now. I have 3 nurses, an integration specialist, and a psychiatrist present here right now. And so it's it's expensive to run a clinic. People don't take that into consideration, but it's very true. The thing I wanted to say really quickly, we're getting ready to end, is if anybody out there is interested in looking, well, first of all, if anybody is interested in making a donation to the Warriors of Consciousness, the website is WOCFUND.org. And if anybody's interested in being put on a list or interested in doing DMTX, we have a website with a landing page up right now, and it's experiencedmtx.com.
Okay. And let's go ahead and mention the website for the podcast and the clinic as well.
So myselfwellness.com is our clinic's website. You can find the MySelf Wellness podcast on YouTube or on Spotify. It's MySelf Wellness Podcast.
Okay. Well, this sounds like a good place to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for your time, Charles, and sharing your personal story, sharing about your life, about your relationship, your kids, the clinic, the podcast, the nonprofit, your own experiences. It's been a delight to get a chance to know you and to speak with you about all these amazing, fascinating topics. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Martin. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was great to connect with you.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day in Florida.
All right. Thanks, man.